The Mafia's Good Girl, Chapter 7. Violet's Point of View. Dylan, can I talk to you for a second? Violet gave Adrian a polite smile before pulling Dylan to the side. She walked far enough to make sure Adrian couldn't hear her before she said, "What the hell is going on here?" "I don't know, Vi." The man just came out of nowhere. Dylan shrugged. "Did you do something? Or say something?" She narrowed her eyes. "Of course not," he said. "If this was about last week's thing, they wouldn't wait a whole week before finding me." "Then what's this about?" she asked. "And you know, I don't like you hanging around these people." "I don't like it either, but these people pay us well," Dylan clapped back. "And I don't know if you know, but we really could use some extra cash right now." Violet let out a sigh. That was a good point. "What are you planning to do?" she asked him. "I'll go and meet him." Dylan paused for a beat before adding, "And maybe I'll ask to borrow some money." "You can't do that." Violet shook her head violently. "You remember what happened the last time Dad borrowed money from these people? Dad went to the wrong guy. He was involved with the Italians." Dylan sighed. "Damon Van Zandt is different." "How is he different?" "Well, he's not Italian." "Dylan." Violet glared at her brother. "He's still leading the freaking mafia." "Shush. Keep it down, V." "We're in a hospital," Dylan chuckled and looked around to make sure no one was listening. "Dylan, I need to know that you're gonna go out there and not do anything stupid," Violet demanded. "Fine. I won't, sheesh." Dylan raised his hands up as an act of surrender. "But I'm still gonna go and see him. I have to. He's called for me, and these people don't like being turned down." Violet nodded her head and bit her lip. "Are you gonna be okay, though?" she asked. "I think so. I mean, if he wants me dead, then I'd be dead already." He shrugged again. "Dylan." "I'll be fine, V." Dylan smiled reassuringly. "I'll just go see him, and maybe I'll offer him some of my goods or services." "Your goods or services?" She narrowed her eyes. "Well, yeah. You know, things that I got a connection for." Dylan covered his mouth as he spoke, making sure no one was hearing them. "You mean like—" Violet couldn't bring herself to continue the words, but she knew what he meant. Dylan's nickname at the union was the Magician because he was known as the guy that could pull anything out of thin air. Yes, that included drugs, weapons, and girls. "But I doubt that he'll want anything from me, though," Dylan said again, muttering under his breath. "I'm sure he can get any drug he wants, or any girl he wants just by existing." So what would Damon want with Dylan? Violet thought. "Hey Dylan, can I ask you something?" "What?" "How much are they willing to pay for the, girls that you bring them?" Violet couldn't even look at Dylan in the eyes as she spoke. It depends." "Depends on?" "The request. Sometimes they want different things, you know," he said as he rubbed his head. "Like a virgin could be sold for like 20 grand at least." Violet's eyes shot up as she heard the number, and she fell silent instantly, lost in her thoughts. Dylan noticed it, and he narrowed his eyes at her. "Why? Why are you asking me this?" he asked. "Well, I don't know," she shrugged. "I was just thinking maybe I could." "Oh, hell no," Dylan almost shouted, and the nurses walking past turned their heads. Dylan cleared his throat and quickly fixed his volume. "Don't even think about it, Vi," he hissed under his breath. "Why not? 20 grand could go a long way right now," she argued. "No, V. Stop being so ridiculous." Dylan glared at her. He was still in shock that she would even think of something like this. "Look, I gotta go. The man's waiting. You stay here with Mom. I'll be right back." "Okay." Violet nodded her head. Dylan let out another deep breath before he turned to his heels. "Hey, Dylan." Violet called out to him before he got too far. Dylan turned around and waited for her to continue. Violet glanced at Adrian, who was smiling at her, and she turned her eyes back to Dylan again. Muttering, "Be safe," Dylan gave her a small smile and he replied, "I will." And with that, Dylan disappeared out of the hospital with the man in black. They got into a dark SUV parked outside, and the car drove away, leaving Violet alone with her thoughts. Damon's point of view. It had been another long day of work for Damon Van Zandt. There was always more to do, and work was never ending. Damon arrived back at the estate at around dinner time, but he didn't even stop to have dinner. Elena, the head maid, had prepared a full 3-course meal for nothing. Damon passed by the dining room and went straight to his office to continue working. Knock on the door will be heard. Damon didn't realize how long he was working until he heard a knock on the door. He checked the clock, and it was almost 9 p.m., but Damon had no intentions of stopping. "Come in," he said without lifting his eyes from the desk. Adrian pushed the door open and stood before him. "Damon, Dylan Carvey's here to see you," he announced. Damon found himself lifting his eyes. "Bring him in." "It's about damn time," Damon thought to himself. A small smile was playing on Damon's face as Adrian moved aside, and seconds later, Dylan Carvey stepped in. "Mr. Van Zandt," Dylan greeted him cautiously. He took a look around Damon's office before slowly walking in. Damon gestured to the chair in front of the desk, and Dylan sat down. "Please, call me Damon." Damon cleared his desk and went to the bar behind him. "Anything to drink?" Sure." Damon came back with a bottle of scotch and 2 glasses. Damon was acting nice and friendly, but this only made Dylan even more anxious. Dylan was fidgeting, and Damon took his time to pour the drinks. "Thank you," Dylan said, once he received his glass. Damon watched him closely, and Dylan swallowed the drink nervously. Damon then opened the first drawer to his desk and pulled out a folder. Dylan couldn't see what he was reading, but it was actually a file that Damon's guys had gathered about the Carvey family. About Dylan and Violet Carvey, to be exact. "Damon, it's you. Quite a surprise that you want to see me," Dylan chuckled nervously, breaking the silence in the room. "Is there something you want from me?" "Of course there is. We'll get there." Damon only smiled. He flipped another page in his file and started reading out loud, "Dylan Anderson Carvey, 21 years old, son of James and Barbara Carvey. You dropped out of Fordham last year before moving back with your family. Why is that?" "Can't really afford it," Dylan said simply. His eyes were narrowed at the file in Damon's hand. "Yes, I saw that your father had passed away, leaving the family with a lump sum of debt." Damon continued without taking his eyes off the paper. "It must be difficult for you, being the oldest son and all. It's all right. I get by," Dylan shrugged. "Is the unions paying you well?" "Not as well as you." Damon let out a smile. He flipped another page in the file and read aloud. "You have a younger sister, Violet Rose Carvey, 18 years of age. She just graduated from McNair High School and was offered a scholarship at Harvard." "That is true," Dylan nodded. "She must be a very smart girl to get a full-ride scholarship to Harvard." "She is. Why didn't she take it?" "Because she's far kinder than she's smart." Damon let out another smile. It seemed like a fascinating answer to him. He put the file down and stared at Dylan in the eyes for the first time that night. "How interesting," he said. "Tell me more." Well, I don't know what to tell you." Dylan shuffled uncomfortably in his seat. "Violet's a good girl. She studies a lot. She loves to read. She loves her family. She goes to church on Sundays." "She's religious?" Damon cut him off. "I guess so," Dylan replied. "And you're not?" "I kinda gave up on the idea of God existing a long time ago," Dylan shrugged. "I see." Damon stood up from his seat and walked to the window by the desk. He had his back turned to Dylan as he said, "Is your sister involved with any other guy at the moment?" Dylan found the question rather odd, but Damon was an odd guy. This meeting in general was very odd. He was suddenly summoned into a Mafia king's private office. Damon had a file about him and his sister, and he was asking Dylan about their private matters. Dylan didn't know where this was going, and he didn't know what else to do but continue answering. As far as I know, Violet has never been with any guy. She's always too busy with work and stuff, Dylan replied. I think she never even had a boyfriend. Damon turned his head instinctively. His eyes met Dylan's again, and he paused for a moment before saying, Are you saying she's a virgin? Dylan didn't know what to say. He knew the answer to that question, but he was too concerned with why Damon was asking for such things in the first place. Answer the question, Carvey, Damon said again. His tone was deep and demanding. Dylan found himself swallowing hard. Yes, I believe so. Good. Damon let out a smile, a big one this time. And why is that a good thing? Dylan asked. The air in the room was getting more and more uncomfortable for him. Damon simply turned around and walked back to the desk. He sat on the edge of the desk, facing Dylan. Then he cocked his head to the side and said, Because I have an offer for you, and it might just help your family situation. Dylan kept his gaze straight at Damon and asked, Which is? Damon's smile grew wider, and he didn't even flinch as he said, I will give you $1 million for your sister's virginity. The Mafia's Good Girl, Chapter 8. Damon's point of view. I will give you $1 million for your sister's virginity. Dylan's mouth instantly fell open. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. You've got to be kidding me, right? Dylan tried to laugh it off, thinking Damon wasn't serious, but Damon's expression was stiff. I'm a man of many things, but jokes aren't one of them, Damon said simply. So you're saying you want to give us $1 million? Yes, and for a night with her. That's… Dylan found himself babbling, looking for the right words to say. Crazy. That's outrageous. And that's up to her. I suppose, Damon said as he moved back to his chair. I guess I'm just letting you know in advance, so that maybe you can give her the message. Dylan stared at Damon in disbelief. So this was why he was being summoned so suddenly, because Damon wanted to buy Violet's virginity. Dylan couldn't believe the man's audacity and confidence, and he couldn't believe what he was offering them either. $1 million was no joke of an offer. Dylan's first instinct was to grab Damon by the collars and yell that his sister was not for sale, but he knew he'd be shot dead before he could even do that, so he calmed himself down. Dylan thought for a moment and he remembered what Violet said to him earlier. Well, I don't know. She shrugged. I was just thinking maybe I could. Oh, hell no. Dylan almost shouted. Don't even think about it, V. He hissed under his breath. Why not? 20 grand could go a long way right now, she argued. Dylan threw his glance to the side and let out a sigh. He was considering the offer, and Damon looked pleased. And what if she says no? Dylan asked after a while of silence. Then that's her choice, no hard feelings, Damon replied, pausing for a beat before adding, but I have a feeling that she's smarter than that. Damon let out a smile, but Dylan wasn't amused. He was shuffling in his seat again, eager to get out of here. All right. I'll tell her about your offer and we'll be in touch. Is that all? he asked. That's all? Damon replied. Dylan got up to his feet. He couldn't wait to get back to the hospital and talk to Violet about the craziness of this whole thing. Oh, and Carvey, Damon said suddenly, causing Dylan to stop his tracks. The offer expires at midnight. Violet's point of view. $1 million? Violet gaped once she heard what Dylan had to say. The big black SUV took him back to the hospital after he met with Damon. Their mother was out of surgery, and she was resting. Violet and Dylan stepped out of the room for a moment, and Dylan told Violet everything that had happened the past hour. He's offering us $1 million for my virginity? Violet asked again, whispering the last part. That's what he said, Dylan sighed. He's not joking about it, Does he look like the type that jokes to you? Dylan asked back. The car's still outside waiting. He says, the offer expires at midnight. Violet fell silent as she took all of this in. It wasn't every day that someone would offer to give you $1 million, even if the offer came with a detestable request. V, you're not seriously considering this, are you? Dylan narrowed his eyes at his sister. And you're not? Violet asked back. It's $1 million, Dial. I know, but it's just a thing. Violet cut him off. Everyone will lose them eventually. But not like this, Dylan shook his head. Why not? Violet argued. Isn't this better than me losing it in the back of a limo at some prom? Hey, Dylan groaned in protest. Violet was actually talking about him. We're gonna get $1 million, Dial. That could pay for Mom's therapy and get rid of Dad's debt. And who knows, maybe we both can go back to school. Violet was making a great point. Dylan would be lying if he said he didn't think of these things too, but he couldn't bring himself to allow his little sister to do such a despicable thing with her body. Dylan had supplied girls to guys and older men before. He knew what they could do to them. Violet was too pure and innocent. She wouldn't stand a chance, especially to a mafia king like Damon Van Zandt. But, I'm your older brother V. I'm supposed to protect you. I can't let you do this, Dylan said finally. You're not making me do anything I don't want to do, Dial, Violet sighed. Look, the way I see it, we're being given an out here. I say we take it. Dylan still looked uncertain, but Violet had that fire in her eyes. She was determined. She already made her choice. Anyway, it's just one night, right? She shrugged. V, I think you should take some time to think about this, Dylan sighed. You heard what he said. The offer expires at midnight, Violet replied. V, don't worry, Dylan. I'll be safe, and I'll be okay, Violet said reassuringly. It's just one night. I'll see you tomorrow morning. Violet glanced at the clock, and it was now 11 p.m. at night. She only had another hour before this opportunity of a lifetime will pass her by. There was no time to stop and think. Violet already knew what she had to do. Dylan knew he couldn't do anything to stop Violet. He put his head down and let out another frustrated sigh. Violet put her hand on his shoulder and squeezed it gently. Take care of Mom, okay? And with that, Violet left Dylan standing alone in the hospital corridor. He watched his little sister walk out of the glass doors and into the black SUV parked outside. A part of him wanted to run after her to stop her, but he couldn't. Dylan was frozen still, standing and wondering if he had made the right choice by letting her go. After about 30 minutes of driving, the black SUV pulled up into this massive estate with huge gates surrounding it. Violet had never been to this area of New Jersey before. This was where all the rich and famous people live, and Violet never had a reason to go here until today. The Van Zandt estate was a sprawling mega mansion that looked like an entire castle, and it was probably as big as her high school building. The car pulled to a stop in front of steps leading up to the front door, and the driver didn't even say one word to her. He probably assumed she'd know what to do. Thank you, Violet said politely before exiting the car. The driver didn't respond at all. Violet stepped out and approached the tall doors. She swallowed hard before giving the door a few knocks. Violet had watched plenty of mafia movies, like The Godfather, Goodfellas, and even The Irishman. She was expecting the doors to open to a bunch of guys with guns sitting in the room, but no. Seconds later, the door opened and this middle-aged lady greeted her. There were no guys in suits and guns, just the lady with a big smile on her face. "Good evening. You must be Violet," she said. "Come on in." Violet took a moment to look around the mansion. Everything was covered in marble or glass and brass. The couches were made of leather, and there were a massive chandelier and fireplace in the middle of the great room. "Right this way. Mr. Van Zandt is expecting you," the woman said again, leading Violet towards the grand staircase. I'm sorry. Who are you?" Violet asked. "I'm Elena, the head maid." "Please follow me. Mr. Van Zandt doesn't like to wait." Violet picked up her face and followed Elena up the stairs. She wondered how Elena knew who she was and how Damon was expecting her. How did he know that she was going to come? Elena stopped walking as they reached a dark wooden double door at the end of the hallway. She knocked twice on the door and waited for a response. "Yes?" A voice answered from the inside. Violet remembered the sound of that voice very well. It was the same voice that was haunting her dreams. It was Damon. "Mr. Van Zandt, I have Violet Carvey to see you," Elena said. "Send her in," he replied. Elena stepped aside and gestured for Violet to go inside. And it was at this moment that Violet was starting to doubt her decision. She looked to Elena for help, but Elena only gestured for the door. "Go on in," she said. Violet took a deep breath and reached for the door handle. The door was heavy, and it took all her strength to push it open. It didn't help that Violet was second-guessing herself. She was now thinking that she made a mistake. "I don't know if I'm ready for this. Maybe I could still back out." The door opened to reveal a large room resembling an old library. In the middle of the room were a large desk and a chair. Someone was sitting on that chair, but his back was turned to Violet. Violet could only see the man's dark hair peeking out of the chair. Violet took another step forward, and the door closed loudly behind her. She glanced back to see how the door was closed, and it seemed like the option of backing away was impossible. "So, you decided to come." Damon's voice pulled Violet's attention back to the front. He was still sitting with his back to her, so she couldn't see his face. "You didn't seem surprised," Violet replied. She was trying to act cool and calm, but she was shaking on the inside. "No, I had a feeling you'd make the right choice," Damon said. And with that, he turned his chair around in one swift move. Violet stopped her tracks as her eyes met Damon's. His head was sea-cocked to the side, and his lips twitched into a smirk. Violet was suddenly lost in a trance. He looked just like in her dream. "Well, don't just stand there, have a seat." He gestured to the chair in front of the desk. With shaky legs, Violet continued walking and took a seat. "Damon, listen, about the—" Violet was about to start the conversation and the possibility of her backing out, but Damon quickly cut her off. "Did you get the flowers?" he asked. "Yes. Did you like them?" "I did." "Good," he said. Violet wanted to speak again, but now she lost her momentum. Meanwhile, Damon was just staring at her. His dark brown eyes pierced into hers, and it was like he could read what she was thinking. Violet found herself squirming in her seat. "Before we get on with our business, there's a bit of a paperwork you'd need to sign," Damon said suddenly. He took out a piece of paper and pushed it towards Violet. "What's this?" she asked. "A written agreement for the price of our sale," Damon replied. He said it so calmly and so nonchalantly, like he wasn't just buying a girl's virginity for $1 million. Violet swallowed hard, and her eyes began to glaze over the words on that paper. The agreement was pretty self-explanatory. It basically stated that she'd agree to this sale for the aforementioned price, and that their signatures would seal the deal. Damon already signed his part, and hers was left blank. Violet looked up to see Damon handing her a pen. She came into this room with the thought of backing out, but after reading this document, Violet had another change of heart. It was $1 million. This was more money than she could ever see in her lifetime. One night compared to that would be minuscule. One could even argue that it was a bargain. So before she could change her mind again, Violet took the pen from Damon's hand and signed her name on the dotted line. Right as the clock struck midnight that night, Violet Rose Carvey had just signed a deal with Damon Van Zandt, the devil in the flesh. The Mafia's Good Girl, Chapter 9. Violet's point of view. There. I've signed it. Now what? Violet asked, pushing the document back to Damon. You can keep that if you want. Frame it or something. He let out a low chuckle, but Violet wasn't amused. She knew full well the gravity of the situation. So, do we just get it over with? She asked cautiously, not sure of the right words to use. Get it over with. He scoffed and narrowed his eyes at her. Why are you treating this like it's something you won't enjoy? Violet fell silent. She never figured enjoyment was part of the deal. She only looked at it as a business deal because it was. Meanwhile, Damon kept his gaze on her for the longest, and it was making her feel uncomfortable. I tell you what, we can just take it easy tonight, Damon said suddenly, and he got up to his feet. Take it easy? Tell me, how far have you ever gotten with a man before? Damon crossed his arms and leaned against his desk, looking down straight at Violet. Violet mumbled and looked down. Did a man ever touch you anywhere? Damon clarified his question. Violet struggled to keep her cheeks from blushing, and she shook her head. Kiss you? She shook her head again. Holy shit, he cursed. Did you ever do anything with a guy before? Violet thought hard for a moment. Well, I held hands with this boy in the 3rd grade. Damon almost broke out in laughter. That only made Violet even more self-conscious than she already was. You're funny, he said. I wasn't trying to be, she replied rather curtly. Violet was already hitting rock bottom. She was selling her body to a guy for money. She didn't think things could get any worse, and yet she had to endure this humiliation. Have you ever touched yourself? Damon asked after a while of silence. Huh? Yeah. Have you ever masturbated? Violet shook her head again. No. Why not? I just never did. Damon let out a sigh. He was looking at Violet like it was hard to believe the things that came out of her mouth. Sure, he knew she was a virgin, but he didn't think she'd be this inexperienced. A girl like her in a world like this, how was that possible? Have you ever watched porn? Do you even know what sex looks like? He asked. I don't believe porn is representative of what actual sex is like, Violet answered. It sounded like something a Catholic grandmother would say. Damon was trying to hold back his laughter. Oh, really? And what do you know about actual sex? He asked, cocking his head to the side. It's a reproductive act. They've taught us that in school, she replied. A smile escaped Damon's lips. He was smiling and staring at her like she was a sight to marvel at. Violet just stared at him in confusion. Well, this is gonna be very interesting, he said finally. Violet swallowed hard. She didn't know what that means, but somehow it made her shiver. Damon let out a low chuckle and got back up to his feet. He returned to his chair and stored the document safely in his drawer. It's already late. You should go to sleep. Elena can show you to a guest room. We'll pick this up tomorrow night, he said. Wait, what? Violet gaped. I can't stay here. Why not? My mom and brother are waiting for me, and I have work tomorrow morning. You're getting $1 million once this is over. Surely you can miss one day of work, he argued. Violet wanted to protest some more, but she didn't know what to say. And honestly, a part of her was glad that she didn't have to do this right now. It had been an exhausting day, and she'd kill for some shower and rest. "I guess staying here for a night won't hurt. I'll be leaving tomorrow anyway." Violet then nodded her head and got up to her feet. Damon pulled out another stack of documents and continued working. She had turned around and she was almost at the door, but she stopped her tracks. There was a question gnawing in her head, and she knew she just had to ask. "Hey, Damon," she said slowly, turning her face back to the man. "Yes," he replied, not taking his eyes off the desk. "I know $1 million is not the usual price for a girl like me." Violet paused for a beat, before continuing. "Why are you paying us so much for this?" "A girl like you," Damon said, as his eyes shot up at her. "Yeah, a virgin," she stammered. Damon narrowed his eyes again, and another smile curved up his lips. "Trust me, sweet girl. I know value when I see one, and I call it like it is. I think you'll be worth every penny." Violet gasped at the words. She never expected this kind of answer, and it was making her blush again. Violet rolled her eyes at herself internally and quickly turned around. She didn't want Damon to know how his words were affecting her. She reached for the door handle, and she was about to walk out, but Damon called out to her again. "Good night, Violet." Even his voice was enough to send shivers up and down her spine. Violet didn't dare turn around or say anything else. She simply closed the door and let out a sigh of relief. She was safe, at least for one more day. "Good morning, Miss Violet." Violet opened her eyes to see Elena standing over the bed. The sunlight was streaming through the window, and Violet couldn't believe the night had already passed. It felt like it was only a few minutes ago that Elena led her to the guest room, and Violet fell asleep as soon as her head hit the bed. She was so tired that she didn't even realize 8 hours had passed. "Elena?" she croaked. "I've brought you your breakfast, and here are some change of clothes." Elena gestured to the table by the window. There was a tray of food and several shopping bags. Thank you," Violet replied. She didn't know getting this kind of treatment was part of the deal, but it was a good thing. She wasn't complaining. Violet rolled off the bed and reached for her phone. She had texted Dylan updates on her situation, and Dylan was updating her on the situation with their mom. It seemed like everything was going along just fine. If everything worked out, according to her calculation, Violet would leave the estate tonight, and her mom could be discharged in a few days. Their family would be $1 million richer, and everyone would live happily ever after. Or so she thought. "The maids are also preparing your bath," Elena said, pulling Violet out of her daydreaming. "Oh, I don't need them to do that. I'll just take a quick shower," Violet replied. "It's an order from Mr. Van Zandt. He says you'll be requiring some special treatment," Elena explained. "Special treatment? Oh, and Dr. Lee will be in shortly. Let me know when you're ready," she said as she headed for the door. "Dr. Lee?" Violet asked. "The house doctor. She'll take care of you." "Take care of me?" Violet didn't know what any of these things mean, but just a short hour later, everything was clear to her. The maids drew her a bath, and they came prepared with all sorts of razors, scissors, wax, and hair clippers. They didn't even have to say a word, and Violet knew what was going to happen. Sure enough, they waxed and trimmed the hairs in her body clean, especially her lady parts, an area that was previously untouched. Violet felt strange after the shave. She had never seen that area of herself without hair before, and it was such an interesting sight. She also liked the way it felt. She couldn't stop touching her soft skin. But before she could get too comfortable, she heard another knock on the door, and an older lady wearing a doctor's coat appeared at her door. She was Dr. Lee, the house doctor, and she came by to do a quick checkup and to give Violet a birth control shot. "You said you started your period a week ago. This means the birth control should start working immediately," Dr. Lee explained. "Okay, thank you," Violet said. "Don't forget to mark your calendar. You should get another shot every 12 weeks, the doctor said as she gathered her things. "Oh, "I don't think that's necessary," Violet laughed. She had no plans on having sex again after this one. At least not until she found the right guy and get married and all that stuff. Dr. Lee only smiled and turned to the door. Violet was left alone in the room, and she let out a sigh, staring at her arm that just got the shot. This whole thing was definitely not how Violet imagined her first time would be like. She grew up in the church, and she always thought she'd have her first time with her husband. She was well on her way to do just that, if only she never crossed paths with Damon Van Zandt. Speaking of, Violet sneaked out of her room in the afternoon to look for Damon, but Elena informed her that Damon was out at work. She was told to wait until he gets back later tonight. Elena didn't say what time he was coming back, so Violet spent the day entertaining herself. Luckily for her, the estate had a huge garden that she could stroll around in, and it also had a massive library with all kinds of books. Violet ended up spending her day reading through the stories of Don Quixote. And before she knew it, the sun had set and the night time came. By 7 p.m. sharp, Elena came to her room to deliver her dinner and a message. Damon was on his way home, and he'd like to see Violet in his office in an hour. Violet was nervous as soon as she got the message. She knew the time was coming. In just a short hour later, she would have to give up her virginity to this strange and mysterious man. Violet told herself not to overthink things. This was only a business deal, and it would be over by the end of the day. Tomorrow she could leave this place, and everything would only remain as a memory. Violet looked through the shopping bags that Elena brought over and picked out a simple lavender dress to wear. After wearing the dress and brushing her hair, Violet kept looking at the clock to check the time. She was getting more and more anxious with each minute that passed. And once the clock turned 8, she almost couldn't breathe. Violet took a deep breath before she exited her room. With shaky legs, she made her way over to the second floor and to Damon's office. Once she got to his door, Violet stopped for a moment to calm herself down. She was suddenly feeling scared, thinking if it was going to hurt and how long it was going to last. She heard stories from people, and she saw videos where people said that the first time would hurt. Violet started to panic, but she knew it was far too late to back out now. She started pacing nervously back and forth for a couple of minutes, and finally, she made up her mind that this must be done. The sooner she finishes it, the better, and then she could move on with her life. Violet let out a deep breath, gathered her strength, and knocked on the door. "Yes?" The voice inside the room said. Violet pushed the door open slowly and peered inside. "Hi. You wanted to see me?" Damon looked up from his desk to see Violet at the door. "I do. Come in." He smiled. Violet stepped inside and closed the door behind her. Damon's eyes followed her every move, and they traced her body from her legs up to her face. "So," Violet started to speak, but Damon cut her off. "I see the clothes fit you well," he said. "Yes, thank you for them. Did you have a good day?" "Oh, sure." "Did they take good care of you?" "They did." "Good." There was now silence in the air, and Violet didn't know what to do. She was standing awkwardly in the middle of Damon's office, her fingers fidgeting nervously. Damon let out a smirk and got up to his feet. Without saying a word, he took off his black suit jacket in one swift move. He threw the suit jacket on the chair and stood in front of the desk. Violet swallowed hard as he began to roll up his sleeves, revealing a sleeve of tattoos and cut marks all over his skin. "Come over here." He stretched out his hand. Violet was scared to take his hand, but she knew she had no other choice. She took his hand, and he pulled her closer. She was now standing at an arm's length away from him. "Take off your clothes," he ordered. Violet swallowed hard. She knew this was it. This was the end for her. The time had come for the devil to claim his prize.